guys in the dark.
I'd grown up in a small coal town in the Appalachian Mountains, on the side of one of the mountains that borders the valley of the town. It was a wonderful place, especially for a kid who was outdoorsy. We had no neighbors, and acres of wood to just play in. From our house, there happened to be a dirt road that wound up the mountainside to the top of the ridge, where there stood the remains of a burnt-down cabin. We would follow the ridge to a flat area, popular with Dad's hunting friends, one of whom had posted a trail cam during the off-season, so he could monitor all the wildlife out there. From there, you can continue up the ridge to a clearing that had hosted lots of flat boulders, giant electrical tower that was fun to climb on. I would venture there many times with my family, in their black lab, spend hours just reading, climbing, and enjoying nature altogether. One fall, I was around 14. I went up there with a backpack full of my snacks and a book. I'd taken care to avoid the trail cams, as it was the old film variety. I'd gotten in trouble for filling entire rolls of film just goofing off in the areas where it was posted. I had reached my favorite rock at the edge of the clearing, near some power lines. I had settled down to read, when Felicia, our dog, had started to bark and growl aggressively. Originally I'd paid no mind, as she just loved to chase deer. This time she didn't bound off into the woods. Instead she had stuck right next to me, growling at something that I couldn't see in the thick tangle of brush and trees on the mountainside that had faced the bank. Now I had considered hiking down that way, into the park on occasion. It wasn't a very easy passage, though. The area had been cleared years before, so they could install that electrical tower, and its place had grown a thick mass of briars and many weeds. The rocks that made for climbing at the top of the ridge were very difficult obstacles on the steep slopes. Not to mention, there was much easier access closer to the park entrance. This way it brought you down to an undeveloped area at the very back of the campgrounds that wasn't accessible to cars or hikers. I was taken off guard to see a man fighting his way through that brush from that exact direction. I called out hello, being very nervous. I had gripped my dog's collar. She had a tendency to jump on people when she got excited. I really didn't want her to tumble him down that mountain. The man had smiled, extracted himself from the thorns, made his way up to the hill, to the base of my rock. I didn't know if it was Felicia's reaction to him, or the rather remote and impassable way that he had come up from. His presence had made him very uneasy. He seemed pretty normal and friendly enough. He was probably about in his late 20s, average height, build. Pretty unremarkable looking. No backpack or even supplies. He was dressed as a hiker would be. I didn't like the way that he had looked at me, although at my young age, I really didn't know why it had unsettled me. As a grown woman, I looked back. I realized he was sizing me up. From his smile, he seemed to be pleased with what he had seen. "Hi, where do you come from?" He had no trace of an accent. That had struck as odd. Our area was pretty strong with regional accents. We don't get a lot of outsiders here. I lived just down the hill. I was hiking with my dog. She seems like a nice dog, he had told me, with a trace of irony. She was snarling and vibrating with malice, but he seemed very unconcerned by any of this. "You have her on a leash, though? Wouldn't want to get you in trouble with the park." We put her on the leash when we're down in the park, but this place is our property. I didn't get a reaction to him learning this. "Still, you're so close. You don't know who might just run up here. No one from the park ever comes up here." At this point, I was being really rude with him. I was annoyed that someone was telling me what to do with my dog, on my own property. "I'm from the park," he said, still grinning at me. "I'm one of the rangers. I wanted to see the property. What would you have done if she had attacked me? You could get into huge trouble." I was really chill at this. We only had one ranger, and he was a close friend of the family. This guy was not him, though. I was afraid to let on that I knew that he was lying to me. I dug out her leash, clipped her, and then stood up, slinging on my backpack. "Sorry, we'll let you get on with your hike. I have to go get home." "Does your family know you're up here?" "Yeah, they expect me home real soon." "Does your dad come here often?" "Yeah, he comes up here to check our trail cams." This was the first time that I saw a friendly stranger's smile falter. "Trail cams, you say?" "Yeah, there's tons of them up here. He and his friends like to go hiking and hunt." The smile returned. It was cold this time. Well, these would make excellent hunting grounds. He had taken a step towards me, and the dog had lunged, nearly yanking the leash out of my hands. I managed to put her back in time to keep her from tearing this man's smile right off of his face. He didn't flinch by her whatsoever. I dragged her away, looking back over my shoulder every so often. He remained motionless in the spot where I had left him, staring right after me with the same weird smile. Once he was gone, I had picked up the pace. Felicia had growled over her shoulder quite a few times. I had heard branches snap behind me occasionally. I would glance back. I saw no signs of him following me. I had cut through the clearing with the trail cam, not bothering to avoid it in my rush to get away from the stranger. Once we had hit that road that leads home, I unclipped her from the leash, broke into a jog. She had remained by my side until I had gotten home. I didn't mention the man to any of my parents, well, at least at first. They didn't like me hiking alone, and I didn't want them to forbid me from doing it. By the time I had gotten home, I convinced myself that I was overreacting to everything that happened. He was probably just another hiker, made up the bit about being a ranger to screw with me, since I was giving him some attitude. I didn't hike back to that ridge that week. Instead, I stuck to the woods below my house. At the end of the week, I had come home from school to an angry dad, demanding to know if I had messed with the trail cam. His buddy had came to get the film, discovered that the film had been switched off with only just a few frames taken. At first, I was concerned with just getting in trouble, and I told him that I was innocent. Then I suddenly remembered that stranger. After telling my father about him, he had called the ranger to ask if there happened to be a new ranger that we didn't know about. The ranger said no, there wasn't. But after hearing my story, he told my dad about the campground attendant that he happened to catch out of a stater overnighting in an unauthorized area back behind the campgrounds just the weekend before. He assumed that this dude was just trying to get out of paying for a camping fee. It was a young guy, he said, average looking, pretty friendly, apologized for everything, and said it was a mistake, and then he ran off. After that, we heard from my dad's buddy with the trail cam. He had gotten the roll developed. Even though there were just a few frames filled up, the last one happened to be me and my dog cutting across the clearing. Thank God I had told the stranger that there were many cams. I imagined that he would give up, since he couldn't locate the other ones. We have since moved into a snug little neighborhood down in the valley. I've moved out of town, in my parents' backyard, on their riverbank. There happens to be a mound covered by Easter lilies that mark Felicia's final resting place. The house that I had grew up in fell in disrepair after it was sold. It was eventually burnt to the ground. No one has lived on the property since. The clearing at the top is still popular with many hunters. When I'm home visiting for the holidays, I like to hike up to the ridge. I wave at all the trail cams, and I always make sure that I bring my dog with me. My name is Doc. I've been backpacking for 19 years. While my trips have never involved anything supernatural or creepy, I did have a scary real-world experience about 12 years ago. My best buddy growing up and I fueled each other's interest in backpacking. We grew into the hobby together, encouraged one another to do so. We were flint and steel, constantly honing one another's ability and interests, pushing each other to excel and succeed. One evening, we planned a last-minute night packing trip to his family's ranch on the Sonoma County coast. We were arriving after work, well after the sun had set. We were both eager to reach the bluffs overlooking the Pacific in time to settle in and blow off some steam from a long work week. We parked at a campsite on the lower end of the ranch. We booked it up to the old logging road up the hills. After a mile pounding the ground, we crested the first major climb and then heard a rustling in some scrub brush to our left. It was well after 2100 at this time. We were in a hurry, but wary of anything that seemed out of the ordinary. We stopped to see exactly what it was. All we saw were some dark shrubs in the moonlight. Not wanting to convey on him that I was alarmed, I passed it off to my friend that it was most likely a deer that had been spooked by us. We pressed on, climbing up into a looming grove of redwoods. The sound of movement in the brush persisted with us, pacing our progress. Every few minutes we would stop and try to see what was clearly following us. It always eluded our headlamps. Each stop was masked by some thin excuse by one or the other of us. We were desperately trying not to betray the fact that we were both alarmed. Near the end of the initial climb, the trail had turned south along the bluff. A nearly full moon shone brightly upon us. Out of the corner of my eye, I had seen movement, a brief flurry that nearly eluded me, but was seared into my mind as clearly now as the night I had seen it. The boxy and squat outline of a mountain lion. It darted for cover as fast as I could imagine, but it had been there, right beside us, for many miles. I rallied my friend, and we hustled along the past the trees into the open hillsides. As far as I could tell, our lion had led us at the tree line and let us continue our course. Shortly after that, we had made it to our planned campsite and settled down for a nice meal and a night filled with a peaceful roar of Pacific. In the early springtime. An evening never once disturbed by our companion from earlier. Years later, my buddy and I returned to the same ranch for a quiet car camping trip. After a filling meal and some nice brews, our conversation settled on that backpacking trip. Through the flickering glow of the fire, he looked directly at me and said, "You know that night we had actually been followed by a mountain lion?" Hearing him say that felt as if a weight had been lifted off of me. I told him that I know. It followed us for quite a while. I didn't want to scare you, so I tried to pass it off as a deer or some birds in the brush. He laughed and replied, "That's funny, because I didn't want to scare you either. I was really worried, but I felt that if we kept our cool, we could get through it." We laughed, poured ourselves another round. To this day, I still think about that night. All I can imagine is that the mountain lion just wasn't that interested in us. That maybe we had entered its territory, and it simply wanted us gone, and ensured this by escorting us away. We were fortunate that it had never followed us beyond the tree line, and that it had kept to itself in the shadows. I shudder to think of what the alternative could have been with that lion. This takes place in August of 2014, in the mountains of Oregon. I'm a military policeman. My girlfriend happened to be at work. It was a very hot day, and began to turn into thunderstorms. My buddy and I decided to go explore some of the back roads, get out of the heat of the town. Oregon is crisscrossed with logging roads, some actively being used, many were forgotten and grown over. We had spent many of our days off starting on roads that we knew, finding many of the roads that we didn't, driving for hours into the mountains, navigating back on all the paved roads. On this one day, with storm clouds building up over the mountains, we had set up on a road we had never been on. We began the drive into the mountains. After driving for about an hour, we hadn't seen nor heard any signs of other people in the woods. We rounded a bend in the thick fir woods. We emerged in a meadow that was totally surrounded by aspen groves. This meadow was perfectly flat. It was very eerie. We both had noticed a strange stillness, just about at the same time. No birds, no insect noise, no squirrels, and certainly there were no other people around. On the far side of that meadow, right at the edge of the tree line, there was a picnic table. The table was very odd. However, it was painted a very bright orange, much larger than a typical picnic table in any kind of park. Remarking on this, I drove to the meadow to get a closer look. I remember being apprehensive as we had approached. The whole scenario was exceptionally strange. The silence of the grove was unsettling. It was nearly impossible to see far into the trees, as the grove was extremely close together. When we had parked at the table, I hopped out of the passenger seat of the truck to go check it out. I'm not very tall, only about 5'5". Regardless, the table was ridiculously oversized and really unusable. The seats were nearly at chest level, meaning that I would have to climb so I could even sit on them. As I was looking at the table, my buddy Nick had called me over to the truck. I noticed that he was looking back into the aspens. At first, I didn't see what he was looking at. Then I noticed a splash of color that was out of the place in the thick areas. A small one-man tent happened to be set up in the trees, about 60 yards or so from the strange table. I was feeling dread all of a sudden. I felt certain that there was someone in that tent, and if we could see that tent, they could definitely see us. There were no campgrounds in this area, no people, no main roads for many miles. Surely someone camping so remotely would be at the very least a strange person. As we observed the tent, we didn't see any kind of movement or hear any kind of sound coming from it. Nick had suggested that I call out to it. I really didn't want to, but I decided I should. "Hey, is there anyone in there?" No reply. I was on edge at this point. Nick and I thought about driving away, just leaving the strange area behind. We began to fear the worst. What if there was a body in that tent? What if somebody had gotten kidnapped? Foolish to think, I know. We thought it all the same. After debating, we decided to have Nick go turn the truck around so we could drive away from the camp. Should we need to leave in just a hurry, he would be waiting right behind the wheel. My heart was pounding. I walked through the trees towards that tent. I was keyed up with my senses on full alert. I reached the site. Several things had struck me as odd. Backpacks were scattered everywhere. No fire was ever built. No wood were collected. The tent was full of backpacks and women's clothing. I was full of dread. I had turned to leave and tell Nick what I had seen. As I left, I heard Nick start yelling at me. "Let's go! Let's get the hell out of here!" Not knowing why he was yelling at me, I had ran back to the truck. When I broke out of the trees, I saw a beat-up old Ford on the road, blocking us from leaving the meadow. I leapt into the passenger seat. Nick had floored the gas pedal. The car was occupied by 2 men. A third person was laying against the window in the back. As we had drove across the meadow, that driver had attempted to block us from the road. Nick had drove around them, accelerated the way that we had come from. I looked back. I saw the car attempting to turn around on the narrow road. Nick had drove like a madman. I honestly was terrified that they would catch us. We had hit the highway without seeing any kind of car again. I still don't know if the person in the back was male or a female. I had let the state police know. They promised to send a trooper out to go check out the scene. I received a call the very next day from a trooper, saying that the campsite, the backpacks, and the women's clothing were all gone, though he could tell people had been in that area. The table was still by the thick grove. I had not returned to the area, and I really do not intend to ever again.
If you enjoyed this video, please subscribe, like, and hit the bell for notifications on future videos, and become a stalker of the night. And I'll see you next time.